I'll start. My name is Rod, and I like to party.
So you mean whiskey?
What?
You're saying it weird.
Saying what weird?
All of it.
Where do you get off?
All right, hey there, church planter. This is Robert Frazier, one of your hosts. This week we have an interview with one of the people in my life that means more to me than anybody because he's a coach, a mentor, a friend. This is Sean Blomquist. He is part of the leadership team for the San Francisco hub of Dimensional Movements, or 3DM, and he is an incredible leader who loves helping leaders get where God's calling them to. And that's what I love about Sean. So welcome to the show, Sean.
Hey, it's good to be here, Robert. So good to see you. And it's nice being with the second best looking bald guy I've ever seen today. It's pretty good, man.
Thank you. Well, I need to trim. That's always the problem with being bald, is there's this constant work of keeping it in shape. And so you've got that daily Bic thing going that just works for you.
It's already tied in, bro. I already lost it, so I don't have to work too hard. It's already there. Being 58.
All right. Well, let's start with. I'm going to turn my mic down a little bit. Looks a little hot. Let's start with your journey, because you aren't just someone who focuses on disciple making and spiritual movement. You're somebody who's been in the trenches as a missionary and as a pastor. So let's start with your faith journey. Let's make it quick and get to the last 15, 20 years and let you dive in.
Yeah. Real quick. I started ministry in Young Life, was a staff guy for about 5 years. So I started really by starting a couple clubs and being an area director out here in the East Bay of California, kind of Northern California, but in East Bay. And out of that, my Young Life experience, I had a bunch of college leaders and had a sense that we should plant a church out of that. And so had a college ministry with a bunch of other churches. And then all those guys went and planted churches that were pastors. And I was left with this college group. So in 99, I launched out with a group of college students. We planted a church called Shelter Covenant Church, and I pastored it for 15 years, back in the day when no one thought you could actually lead a church with college students and do all that. And so we kind of had the young adult thing going in the Bay Area, and I pastored and led them for 15 years and saw multiple generations of discipleship. We had some missional communities going then and had some of that multiply out, had my elders and leaders in those house churches or families on mission or missional communities, whatever language we want to use, micro church, there's a million words for it, but it was in your house with people that didn't know Jesus and helping them become followers of Jesus and then make disciples. So that's what I did for 15 years. And I stumbled onto 3DM around 2008 when I was kind of in the throes of church planting. And we were about 7 years in, I guess, around there, 7 or 8. And I wasn't quite seeing multiple generations happen of discipleship. And I saw Mike Breen's stuff and I read the book, Building Discipleship Culture. And I said, wow, he's been doing everything I've been wanting to do for ever, and he's already, and he's in Sheffield, England. They're 20 years ahead, and England, non-Christian world, which is what California continues to be. And so I just said, this is the stuff. And God really pushed me to say, submit to their journey and follow Mike Breen and his way of doing things in terms of discipleship. And so I've been doing it since 2008. And now I'm currently coaching and leading pastors, yourself included, your church. We're seeing some stuff seen some, movemental stuff beginning to happen with churches out in, the Treasure Valley where you are. And that's kind of how we got connected. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm doing a lot of coaching, consulting, pastors, leaders, leadership teams. But that was my church planting journey, and in Northern California, which is, you know, like most non-Christian areas in the world.
Yeah, it's
So
godless wasteland that you keep sending your not you're not sending your best and brightest up to Idaho. You're giving us your rejects, and we want the best and brightest now. Okay.
yeah, and the funny thing is, when we were in California, I mean, I saw as I was planting, there was so many young church planters coming out in California, and it was a 75% fail rate,
Oh
So I
man.
was doing our church plant, and other guys were trying to come in and do the same thing, and it was, I mean, 75% fail rate, and trying to help guys stay in the game, and men and women, and it was rough, so
And you grew up there
I understand that.
in Northern California too, so that's home for
Yeah,
you, which is not. I mean, a
yep.
lot of people are in and out of California. It's kind of like it's a very transitory place, especially big cities like that. What's kept you there long term? How have you stayed through the thick and thin of it?
Yeah, I think for me, crystal clear, gift mix for me out of the fivefold is apostle prophet. So I wanted, I wanted, and I knew that I needed to stay in one place for my entire life. And California is my home and where I'm at. And at the same time, I wanted to see things expand. And so I really feel like you have to be rooted. You have to say, I'm ready to ground myself here for the rest of my life and invest in these people. And so the parachuting, the moving around, those days are over. You just, you can start that way if God's called you to do it, but you got to stay, and I just relationally, I don't think there's any way around that.
Yeah,
So
that's
you
something
have to be in culture.
that was a part of the way we when we were starting. I was reading a book by Alan Briggs called "Staying is the New Going," and what he
Yeah,
made this
fully.
case for is that when you plant yourself in a place and you stay for 5, 10 years, you miss out on a bunch of the fruit because you don't
Yep.
actually root your life in a way that you can walk with someone through the seasons that are coming, and you don't have the trust and the authority that comes from being around. And so for us, when we planted, we said basically we're going to stay in this neighborhood. Our kids are going to go to school 2 doors down, and we're gonna focus. And that's, for apostles, we're always asking what's next, right? We're looking over the next
Fully.
hill saying,
Absolutely. Yep.
how can I go on another adventure? And I
Yep.
always need new people, especially at prophets. They always need new people because they're burning through the old people. But it's like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
then and it's easy to just like kind of flip one to the next. So yeah, I love that, and I think that what we're seeing locally here in the valley, we have a church planting movement called City Network, and we've planted 70 churches over the last 6 years. The trickle of the parachute planters coming is slowing as house prices have risen.
Yeah.
They like the idea of a nice place
Sure.
that's growing with kids that had affordable housing. You take away the affordable
Sure.
housing, and all of a sudden they start asking different questions like, "Is God really
Yes,
calling me
they
to
do.
Boise? Maybe there's a cheaper place." But much
But
like Northern
I mean, there's a
California, yeah,
there is a lot of sociology behind church planning, right? I mean, we go to growing areas, and so it's not rocket science when it comes to that. But you have to. 5 years is just simply the root work, and you haven't even gotten to the fruit work yet, And so we underestimate the way of life we're supposed to live, and we think of it as like the plug and play. We just do this thing, preach and they come, build it and they come, all that kind of thinking just doesn't work anymore. I don't think it was
yeah.
ever intended to be that way, but um, you know,
Well,
we're in the
there's
we're in a
the
season where, especially in California, where you have to do it.
yeah,
You don't
there's
have the
the
option.
church planting industrial complex that is built around the technical aspects of church planting, and the technical aspects of the fundraising and the team raising and the promotion schedule and the organizational piece. And so people got really good at the stuff that doesn't matter in some ways. All of those things won't actually make a difference in people's lives unless there's somebody saying, I'm going to go and I'm going to, what we say is we want people to not plant a church, but we want people to plant their lives, do evangelism and discipleship one hand in hand, and then see the church emerge out of the work of mission. And what you're saying is that's the only way to do it in a place where you're post-Christian, because even in a place like Boise, you do a great job promoting yourself and you start preaching and all that stuff. No one's asking, hey, I need to go somewhere to church on Sunday, because that's not the
They're not
question they're
asking
asking. No, they're not, and I can tell you because
that. In
I work
Boise,
in.
not asking that anywhere.
No, I mean I on digital marketing you could pay $100 for the keyword looking for a church, because no one's doing it. Like it's so rare that someone's looking for a church that you've got to go find the person who's looking. And it's because the mountains and the rivers and people move here so that on the weekend they're not in town. And that changes
Yep.
the dynamic, right?
And you're only hitting the same 10% when you do that, because there's only 10% of the people that are actually looking for a church. And then we're just swapping chairs and moving. And we all know this stuff now. And so until we actually take discipleship and mission serious as an integrated way of life, and actually we have to, as leaders, do it first, and then actually have a way to show people how to do it. And if they don't want to do it, they're going to leave and go to a different church. And that's what we're really trying to do here. And that's why it's the slow work of really saying, are we a called people that want to live a way of life? Not plant a church, but live a way of life where a church or the ecclesia, the people emerge out of it. And, that's how we have to do it, and there's no way around that. And I think God's just continuing to look for people that are really called to that way of life. And that's always what I've always wanted to do. And that's what my Breen and Sheffield has done. And now we have a language and a way to do it, and there's others doing it for sure. It's not 3DM's the only way, but you just got to choose your way and stay with that path. You went on mute on me, bro.
Oh, sorry. I'm trying to mute so that it's like clear audio when you're talking. Uh, let's start there and let's dive in a little bit. When we're talking with church planters, you've been doing this for 5-10 years full time, doing like disciple
Since
making.
2000. Yes. Yeah, I've been doing it since 2008.
Okay.
In
Yeah.
terms
So
of, in terms of 3DM, I mean, I've always been investing in people. I just didn't see it reproduced. You're
yeah.
always missing some parts of it to see it actually get passed on to beyond you, from first to second generation. The third, fourth generation kind of thing is really what we're really trying to fight for, and that's the long haul. Really
Yeah.
get a culture.
Well, and the missiologists say that you don't have a disciple making movement until you have multiple branches of third and fourth generation. That's where you show that there's fruit in the transformation of a person to create disciples over time. And so you've been doing this for a while. You've worked with a lot of leaders, you've worked with a lot of churches, you've worked with a lot of church plants. And I want to ask you some questions about what are you seeing out there where people are struggling and why? And then we're going to ask the opposite question of where are you seeing fruit where there's there's the beginning of disciple making movement happening, and why is that happening that way?
Yep. So when I think about the struggle that pastors go through, usually I call it, they hit the wall, where they've actually had to go at it. They've made some disciples around their leaders. They're starting to see some growth, but they hit the wall where they're not sure how to reproduce that in a way to pass it on. So the number one thing I see in most church planners is they have a lot of unconscious competence. They know how to do it, but they don't know how to take that unconscious competence in them and make it conscious competence to pass it on to their people. And it is the secret sauce of leadership, is and what I do with as a as a leader is help take what's inside of you, get it out of you so you can pass it on to your leaders. And that's what I see happening in most church planters. They can do it. They're gung-ho, they get after it, then they hit the wall because they don't know how to take what's in them and get it out of them because they're intuitive. And intuitive leadership is good leadership, but it's not great leadership. And I'd say that is, when I think of the leadership journey for pastors and church planters specifically, that's where they get stuck. They're good at it, but they don't know how to get it out of them. And so for me, that's what I do as a coach. And that was the thing that 3DM has helped me most with. And we may get pushed back on the shapes and the tools, but the tools are the language and the handles that communicate what is inside of us as leaders that we're trying to get out of us. And I think we resist that to our demise. We don't have a way to take what's out of us.
Well, and that was my journey in so many ways, where I could gather a group of people and I could teach them about Jesus, but I didn't know how to teach them how to train people in the way of Jesus. It's kind of that. It's like we're creating these hybrids that are infertile. Like when you have a horse and a donkey, it makes a mule, and the mule can't then reproduce. That's kind of what we do with the world and the kingdom. We produce this hybrid that then can't reproduce. And I hit 35, and I was like, if I'm going to be doing this rest of my life, I've got to go from somebody who can lead an organization and can put on an event to somebody who can train people, because I had to grow. It wasn't natural. And I in some ways, I don't think training and equipping is natural to anybody. I think it has to be something that's passed along person to person, right?
It really is. And that's the key, because what we've done, basically what I want to say with American Christianity, is we've just become so information based and not imitation based. And so we take the information and then we just go out as church planters and innovate in our own context. And then we always get stuck because we don't actually have someone to help us imitate the way of life we're really supposed to live, which is why we have the gap of discipleship. That's why we have the burnout. That's why we have the crash and burns, because we go from information to innovation rather than information to imitation and then innovate. And
yeah,
that is our issue.
Well,
you need,
and so
you
many
need to pull it out of you, over time and show you how to do this stuff.
Yeah, and so many church planners even stop at information, where they've bought into kind of a mid-century evangelicalism that says, as long as you know what's true, it will transform you. But we know fundamentally from experience, and then from Jamie Taylor. Jamie, what's his name? James K. Smith, Jamie Smith. Yeah, he tells us that it's literally what you are becoming, what you do. Like it literally is this deep interconnection between the way of life that you live out rather than what you think, because what you think actually doesn't change you. How you live changes how you think. And that's a key piece for pastors kind of grab hold of, is to say, I'm not trying to teach people how to think. I'm trying to teach people how to live. I'm trying to help people find the way of the kingdom and be transformed by it.
Absolutely.
Well, and you see that both with Jesus and with Paul too.
We just call that formation. That's what it means to form a life. You know what I mean? And finally, evangelicals have gotten on the formation bandwagon the last 20 years, but we still do it as information. We teach contemplation as information. Here, you just do it this way, but we don't really do it. You know what I mean?
Here's a book, a class, and a program, and you will learn how to do this thing. Yeah. Oh, I mean, so Jesus does that with his disciples at the Great Commission. He says, teach them to do everything I commanded you. And then you see Paul tell Timothy the same thing. All the things you heard me say, the way, the manner of life that you saw me do, pass that on to the next generation. And instead we said, I'm going to teach, and I'm only going to teach, and I'm not going to show. I'm not going to let them experience my life. And yeah, so let's dive into.
We're always looking for shortcuts. We're always looking for shortcuts because the way is hard. It's simple to understand. We always know this is simple to understand, and I keep trying to make it simpler and simpler so that people know that there's no shortcut. It's simple to understand, hard to live. And we all know that.
Well,
So,
and I think as a pastor, the thing that we're most concerned about is I don't really want to give people access to my life.
mm,
And that's there's two reasons for that. Number one is if people have to have access to my life, then there's a finite number of people that I can influence. And if I can
well,
influence them from a distance, then I'm going to be more effective or efficient in ministry, right? And then the second
okay.
piece is I may not have a life that's worth imitating as a
Ooh,
pastor. And I'm really afraid of you getting close and seeing that I'm actually still yet formed in those places. And instead of inviting you to see God form me, I want you to imagine how I was formed in the past and then just figure it out on your own, right? Isn't that kind
and
of
I can tell you from the platform on Sundays all my great victories after. Guys, most guys when they're preaching, and women too, men and women, there's more vulnerability and openness than I've ever seen. So there is a really, especially from the platform, everybody knows lead from weakness, and everybody's really good about that. From watching people preach and communicate, and I think they've done a tremendous job. They just don't know how to take it from there and actually get it into people's lives because they still have to run the Sundays, once you're there, and they don't have the bandwidth, and that's a lot of the struggle.
well, yeah, and I what my first job at a church, I got drafted to plant a campus for a church, and and some guys would have chafed at the reality that I was only preaching every 4 to 6 weeks, and it
Yeah.
was it was video most of the time. It was a venue sort of deal, but I kind of liked that because it meant that I wasn't like, and in my mind, as an apostle, like I was like I don't want to waste my time sitting in my study. I had done a lot of study and I didn't see that was transforming lives. I was like I want the freedom to be mixing it up with people who are far from Jesus and helping them with discipleship and with evangelism. And a lot of our church planners, if they're teachers and pastors, what they want to do is sit in their office and prepare beautiful sermons and spend 10, 15, 20, 30 hours a week preparing for that sermon. What do you tell those guys to help them kind of shake loose the Jonathan Edwards, Puritan ideal of the this cedar walled library in which they'll prepare sermons that will transform lives, like the Great Awakening?
I'd say it's pretty simple. You just have to say that's not the way Jesus did it.
Oh, going right at them. I like it. I like it.
I just don't know any way around that, bro. You just don't see Jesus doing it. So you got it. You can't do it. If you're going to do it the way
Uh,
Jesus did, you got to do it the way Jesus did. So, and that's our thing is we've been trained through the Enlightenment. And so, there's a dying, there's a letting go, there's a repentance to that way of doing things. And if we don't repent of it, we're already seeing the demise of the church because of that way of doing things. We just have to connect those dots. And I think until you connect those dots, you're going to keep doing what you've been trained to do in our seminaries and other places is pass on information and think that this is the way to do it. And if you just look at the Gospels, you look at Paul and Acts, and they didn't do that. And so we have to choose if you have to. And I'm not saying we don't do church, and I'm not saying we don't preach and we don't communicate. And there's times where I do spend 10 to 15 hours, maybe 20 hours in a sermon if I'm getting there. Now I'm 50, I don't have to do that much anymore. But I've had to prune my time back to, 6 to 8 hours in sermon prep. But the reason is then if I need to put time in, I have other people. If I haven't had time to train other communicators, that's the problem. The problem isn't putting the time in, it's that I have to do it every week because I don't have anybody else to do it. That's part of the problem right there. We haven't created disciples. So that if you can teach other people to do it, then you can split your time in half and do the other things as well. That's what we have to learn how to do is have a church or an ecclesia that everyone's sharing those things. And you've done really good at that. Your sister's a great communicator. She's a killer leader. She
yeah.
loves to teach. Let's split your
Yep.
time in half. You got her
Well,
doing it. And
and
if you have other pastors,
I've got 10 people in my congregation who are capable communicators. And I'm always going, how can I do this less and still, keep be that I still have to be the directional leader. Like there's a piece that God is still calling me to. But like what's the minimum I can teach and still be the direction? I'm asking a different question.
Yeah, but see, even that is I like even when I wasn't teaching, I was still the lead worshiper. So when I came up and did announcements, I would tie in vision. I would do some of that, or it just there's we have to think in terms of your life is about multiplication. It's not about anything else. How do I reproduce myself in the culture I want within this place, this ecclesia? And so if you're leading those 10 communicators in discipleship and you're in their life, then it's real easy to do because they're going to pick up your way of life. That's how Jesus did it. But it's just so counterintuitive for us to understand that, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's just been so freeing for me to see that and realize now it's effortless. Now it's just the way I live. I don't even
Yep.
bat an eye.
Yep.
And it's
Well,
easy.
and that's the shift is the metric going from, and we talk about this pretty often on the podcast and in our trainings with church planners, is that if your metric is how big is the place and the people and the budget that I'm managing, if that's your metric, you're going to build a system that's going to get you more people in the door. But if your metric is kingdom transformation and kingdom movement, the metric changes to asking how am I sending and equipping more people? And if
Absolutely.
that's ruling you, then your life, your work, your hours of the week is going to shift more towards how am I giving people access to my life? How am I focusing on training them? How am I giving them opportunities to lead? How am I giving them space to process their own leadership journey and helping them through that? And then your whole week looks way different when that's your metric, right? Instead of me
It
spending too
really
many hours
does.
preaching.
Yeah, it really does. And I think the hardest church planters, especially if this is their first one or they're just getting started, is they've never done it before.
Uh-huh.
So you still have to learn how to do that stuff. So when I was in my 30s, I'm 58 now. So when I was in my 30s doing this, I had to put a lot of time into a lot of different things. And I had to own the fact that I go, okay, I think I intuitively know how to do this stuff, but I really don't because I haven't actually done it all myself. So I still trying to do it myself, let alone show people how to do something that I actually haven't fully done myself as a church planter. You know what I mean? And so that's the tension they're in a little bit, which is why they need a coach, which is why they need a mentor. You can call it a spiritual director, but it can't be just a spiritual director. They have to know how to do your spiritual director in terms of your inner life, but also help you strategically know how to actually do this stuff, and to have a combination of both of those things as young church planners is the goal that that's what's gonna help them make it, long
Well,
term.
and that
Just
takes us
figure out
to
how to
a really important place, which is how do you become the kind of leader who makes disciples if you're trying to make it up on your own? If you've never experienced somebody training you in how to do it and training you in how to teach others how to do it, how are you gonna, there's maybe 1/10 of 1% of people are so naturally gifted at writing and communicating and understanding and passionate about the gospel that they can look at Jesus and see from a distance and create something on their own, but they're still going to lack the experience of the way, which is the embodied gospel, the kingdom reality flowing through somebody's place in the world and experiencing the love and the joy and the peace, all the fruit of the spirit in their lives. So how does somebody like if you're a church planner out there going, I hit 35 and I go, if I'm going to do what Jesus called me to, I've got to be great at making disciples and I don't know how to do it. I have to find somebody who knows how to do it. And I had watched so somebody you discipled had discipled my little sister and her life was transformed into this like from a Christian hedonist into a disciple making follower of Jesus. I'm serious. I mean, over
yeah.
2 years, God transformed her life. And I go, I got to figure out how they did that because I don't know how to do that. And it required, level of humility. But if guys are saying, I need this, how do they find somebody that's going to work with them and help them discover that?
Yeah, if I if I look out over the horizon right now, I would say there's so few sages that are actually beyond just information, platform book writers, to actually having space to coach and invest in leaders like that. I think Scazzero's doing fantastic stuff. I think there's a lot of things that are beginning to percolate out there. We just don't have enough older women and men that are integrating both spiritual formation and reproduction, strategic kind of kingdom expansion in an integrated way. And I think that's why I've stuck with 3DM. I think that's what I've given my life to, is saying I'm going to invest in the next generation of leaders. I don't need to do it. I need to show them how to do it. I still have to be I still have to be in it. I'm in a church. I'm with my senior pastor at Hope Center Covenant Church. And we just had our first missional community last night, pizza potluck, and had people there and did prophecy and, had the thing, but we're just getting launched, with them doing it. And I get to be a part of that. But at the same time, I think most church planners, it's sparse to find those leaders, and you have to really seek it out. You have to ask, Lord, who is doing this that can actually show me the way. And I think for us at 3D Movements, I think that's what we're doing. That's who I am. That's what I want to do. I think there's there's definitely other groups doing it. I think Exponential has a path with that's doing it. I think Dave Ferguson's doing a great job. So there's a lot out there that's happening. I'm hoping it's the depth of coaching and access to life that's really essential. Like, access to me is what I tell people. You have access to me. I always tell them that. You will always get a hold of me within 24 hours once I'm on vacation, and that's what I try to say. And we have to have accessible lives as older leaders to give it to the next generation.
Yeah.
I would tell them you have to find, if they're reading somebody, follow up with that person and go, I like what you're writing. Can I have access to your life? Guys used to do that. I mean, men and women, when you do that with Eugene Peterson, he'd say, all right, come up to Montana, come hang out with me,
Yeah, he did that all the way to the end. There were people who
Absolutely.
he'd invite him up to the house and give him access, and
Absolutely. And so that's really what I would say,
Yeah, I think we're in a spot. In some ways, it's like a renaissance of disciple making, as we're seeing. Like John Mark Comer is like given his life to say, okay, I'm gonna try to figure out a way to help people discover practicing the way of Jesus. I love that, and he really learned a bunch from Scazzero. He learned a bunch from Dallas Willard. The what do they call it? The School of Kingdom Living that Willard's organization does is phenomenal work. A lot of like Renovari and what they have done with spiritual formation is great stuff. Rob Wagner's a
Ruth Haley
friend,
Barton.
and they're
Ruth Haley
Rob
Barton.
Wagner's disciple. Let's see, Disciples Made, and then you got Disciple Shift, Jim Putman. Like there's great stuff out there, and everybody's using the same source material, right? We're all starting with Jesus, and we're trying to
Yes.
imitate him, and so for me, it's like I'm working with 3DM because that's the relationship and the friends that I had, and we love what we're learning, and it's giving us a reproducible way to make disciples. We're starting to see third and fourth generation disciple making, and we have a massive capacity for disciple making because we're pouring into leaders. It's been powerful, and so I want to tell everybody, if whatever it is, find somebody who's doing it. Find somebody who has a
Yes.
reproducible way and has a life worth imitating, and tell them, I'm willing to give you access to challenge me and help me find Jesus if you'll give me access to your life. And there's
Yes.
incredible things that happen when you do that.
I'd say it's non-negotiable. Like if you're going to make it and you
Yep.
really want to be about not just planting a church, but actually being a discipling movement, you have to have a guide. You have to have mentors. You have to have somebody you're following. If you're not following somebody, then that's where the trouble is. And that's where the trouble will be, no matter what, because it's not the way of Jesus if you don't have it. And that would be the number one thing. Because once you find something worth following, then they'll help you do it. And then it gets imitated and modeled and reproduced.
You've got to ask it's Dallas Willard's two famous questions, right? What's your plan for making disciples, and is it working? And both those are much more of a revealing question than anybody wants to admit, right?
Absolutely. And guaranteed, if you don't have somebody that you're following, you're going to bump up against yourself and face those limitations. And you can't read the next book. You have to be in life with somebody.
Yeah. And
because it's the way.
The book's
Mandalorian, baby.
Yeah. Well, the book's not going to look at you and go, cut the BS. Let's get real. No book is going to actually read your mail and go, let's talk about, hey, there's this piece of your life that has yet to be formed. Are you ready to dive in? Are you ready to give God access to that?
There's no mirror.
That's right, man. Well, so we're going to actually, we have a part 2 coming up in a couple weeks on the show with you, Sean. But today I wanted to finish up with today saying thank you so much for making some space. How could people connect with you if they're looking to learn more or even, dive into a discipleship relationship?
Yeah, it's called a cell phone. You have access to me. You actually can call me. And, my number is 925-212-9498. And, I will set up a time and you will have access to me. And I lean heavy on relationship. And this is the way it is because it's the way. So I always tell guys, when I say guys, men and women, because I'm, like I said, like you said earlier, I got to coach, Anna Magera out there where you are, and she coached your sister and disciple sister, which helped you see what was going on. And so men and women, you want investment, you have access to my life and you have my cell number, and that is a way to access me.
Well, we're putting that in the show notes. So if you're looking for Sean and or you want to spam him with text messages, it will be in the show notes available for you.
There you go. Hopefully you won't go to my spam and you'll get right in there and you'll have access. So that's how we do it. The old-fashioned way, Call me.
Call me. I'll be sitting by the phone. All right. Well, we will put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for being with us today, Sean. We really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation.
Really good, bro. I love you. Thanks for our conversation earlier, too. I love being in your life, man. And it's why I wake up in the morning, man. You always have access, brother. I love you, tons.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and as we're starting the show, like I'm wiping tears from my face because Sean and I are talking about, the real nonsense in my heart and soul. So you get the good stuff. Remember, friends, if you want to reach the people that no one else is reaching, you got to go where no one else is going and do what no one else is doing. We'll see you next time on the Church Planter Podcast.